Joining on YouTube again this morning. We're going to start in Exodus 19, eventually get to Exodus probably 24 today. We're not going to, a couple chapters or stuff that we're not going to get into because we're really focused in the book of Exodus on the life of Moses. Dr. Sher is out of town today. I assume he is returning from his camping trip. He was way out west, out in the Dakotas. So they're taking their time, enjoying that. I think it was for an anniversary. Forget how many years it was, but so they're out there. So we'll be in Exodus chapter. We'll start in that chapter 19, which we covered this week. I want to review it just a little bit because when the Israelites, led by Moses and really led by God in the pillar of cloud and fire by day, when they reach Mount Sinai about a couple months after their exodus from Israel, it is a pivotal thing that kind of sense echoes through or impacts the rest of Scripture. And here's what I found. Maybe this is the case for you, maybe it's not. When reading the Bible, sometimes it's hard to keep track of the time and space in which these things are happening. So what we'd say is about the place where it happens. So if we say this is a historical account of something that happened, it happened in a particular place where you could find right now on the planet Earth. We know it's on the Sinai Peninsula somewhere. We don't know the exact mountain it happened. And it also happened at a specific time. And I think it's important to kind of measure out a timeline, especially it's one of these pivotal events. It's important to me. It's really important to make sure we recognize Scripture as bound in space and time because it's historical. One of my kids said something pretty interesting to me earlier this year. They go to a Christian school, so they have Bible classes. And their Bible teacher referred to someone like Moses and Aaron, people in the Bible, as characters. They said, she said, I don't think he should refer to them as characters because they're real people. And it actually happened. And so you shouldn't make it sound like it's Lord of the Rings or Gunsmoke. This is different. It's real people happening. And so we're going to kind of review a timeline as we get to, eventually we'll get to chapter 3 and unpack some things, 23, and unpack some things there. So day 1, which is Exodus 19:3. And the other way of thinking about this in time is you visualize Mount Sinai and Moses going up and down where he is and where the people are. So day 1, Moses climbs up to the mountain to talk to God. And up there, God tells Moses that he wants to offer a covenant to the Israelites, and for Moses to tell them, I'm going to offer you a covenant. A covenant is a binding agreement, a partnership with God, and we'll talk a little bit more later if we have time about exactly what this is. And so he goes up the mountain, God talks to the mountain, he climbs down to the mountain and said, you know what? God is going to make you offer, but he himself is going to speak to you when he makes this offer, and the Israelites agree on day 1 to listen to the covenant. Moses then climbs up the mountain to bring the Israelites' reply to God. So he's kind of messaging back and forth. And you think about, like, at this point, Moses is 81, 82 years old. He's climbing up and down a mountain. Some people who think that Mount Sinai, they've identified it as a peak, 9,000 feet high. So you think about how far up the mountain is Moses going. Does he have supernatural stamina, or is he just really in good shape for a guy his age, especially? And so Moses climbs up the mountain, tells the Israelites, reply to God, and God tells Moses to get the Israelites ready for the covenant offer on the 3rd day and set boundaries for how close they can approach the mountain. They're only supposed to go up to the edge, not cross it, or they would die. So Moses goes back down the mountain second time on day 1, and tells the Israelites they have 2 days to get ready for God's offer of a covenant with them. And so day 2, they're just preparing themselves. They're supposed to wash their clothes and sort of They were consecrated, set apart for God, this agreement they're going to make. On day 3, there is thunder and lightning, and a loud ram horn are seen from the top of Mount Sinai. Moses brings the Israelites from their camp to the foot of Mount Sinai. Moses speaks, and God calls him up to the top of the mountain. And so again, so the people are at the foot of the mountain. Moses climbs up the mountain, and God tells him to establish boundaries so the people don't cross it. Moses says, I've already done this. The people aren't going to cross. They won't die. And God sent Moses down the mountain again on day 3 to get Aaron, but not the priests. So Moses and Aaron are at the base of the mountain, and God speaks directly to the Israelites. And when he does this, what he gives them is the 10 Commandments. Now, I found a very helpful resource this week about this timeline on Mount Sinai, because I realized it was a little bit discombobulated in my head more than it should be. So I looked at this and researched it. But one of the things I was thinking last week is, did the Israelites hear God audibly speak the 10 Commandments to them? And it seems like the answer is yes, which is an amazing thing. I mean, to think about what the voice of God, to audibly hear it, what your reaction would be, what it sounds like. It's a pretty incredible thing. When they hear it, though, the reaction was this. They are terrified, and they say to Moses, we don't want to hear God speak to us anymore. We do not directly want to hear his voice. We want to go back to how it was, where you spoke to God and then relayed the message to us. And so Moses on day 3 goes back up the mountain, and God gives him all these laws regarding worship customs and just these various laws. They had all sorts of laws. They had laws for, like, if you get in a fist fight, depending on how bad you might hurt someone, this is what it's going to be. If your cow gets loose, or an oxen, they say oxen and cow, same thing, right? Is an oxen in the cow family? Some cows have horns, though, right? Not that kind. Okay, what's a steer? Longhorn. That's a steer. Okay, we got our Texan here. A longhorn is a cow, right? Adjacent to an oxen, right? So anyway, there's laws like, hey, if my oxen wanders into the land and gores your oxen, here's what I got to do. If it gores a human being, here's what you got to do. All these sorts of laws. And for livestock, for people, hey, if you dig a hole and someone falls into it, what happens? Which is, there's all these laws, some laws on worship, other relational laws. And so that's what's happening on day 3 on his second trip up the mountain. He spends the night, he climbs down the mountain, and he spends the night of day 3 writing down everything that the Israelites, that God had said for the Israelites. And so he's down there, he's writing it all down, all of God's instructions about the fighting, the oxen, not cows, with the horns, falling in a pit, and a host of other things. If you read 21 through 23 of Exodus, you can see exactly what it's talking about. One of them is you're not supposed to cook a goat in its mother's milk, all right? Cooking meat with dairy was prohibited for reasons that I don't understand, but that's one of the rules. So on day 4, we're going to turn to Exodus 24 now. We're on day 4, and Moses has been up to the mountain and received the first section of the law of God, come down, written it, and now God is ready to make a covenant with the people. And so here's how, let's read the first 3 verses. The Lord said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship from afar. Moses alone shall come near to the Lord, but the other shall not come near, and the people shall not come up with him. And so there's a point in which Moses, several of his associates, and then the 70 elders of Israel are going to go partially up the mountain. Moses is going to go at a higher elevation than them. And that's what, and they're going to experience God in a different way than the people at the foot of the mountain did. Verse 3 says this: Moses came and told the people the words of the Lord and all the rules. And the people answered with one voice, all the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And so God presents this offer. They had already heard the Ten Commandments, and then Moses says, this is the rest of God's law. It's an agreement that we want to it's not a contract, it's a covenant. We want to enter an agreement where I'll be your God, you'll be my people. Your end of it is you're going to do these laws, and you doing these laws will make some of my promises to you contingent. And the people say, yes, we're going to do that. Verse 4 says, and Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. Then he arose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and the 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And so what happens in the rest of this paragraph down through verse 8 is he is making a covenant with them, and it's a reminder that the way in which they worshiped and expressed commitment is so much different than ours. There were animal sacrifices that were made. And so the people were kind of assembled on one end, and then there were, Moses set up 12 pillars to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And he collected some of the blood from these sacrifices in bowls. And the blood, I don't know. The use of blood in a religious ceremony, I don't know, it strikes me as very, like if I went into a church service and there was real blood, I would be like, I'm freaking out. This is not the place for me. Something is going to run amok here. This is what they did. They recognized a couple things. Blood in the system, and we still believe the same thing, really, has a cleansing effect. So we have not come in contact with the literal blood of Jesus. But if you said, hey, what is the reason that we think that we can have God's favor even though we're sinners? Why does God treat us as clean when we're not? I would say it's because of the blood of Jesus. So it has a cleansing effect. It has it represents the life. It represents life, but it also represents the seriousness of a covenant. Like you can get in and out of contracts pretty easily. Covenant is something binding that cannot really be voided, so to speak. An example of this is when God first made a covenant with Abraham. And the way he did it is there were some animals, I forget the exact animals, but he had Abram kill them, chop them off, and kind of make a walkway in between each half of an animal. There were 3 or 4. I'm not sure the exact number of animals. It's in Genesis. You can look it up. And then normally in a covenant, both parties would walk through. It sounds very strange to us, but they'd walk through it. And the symbolism here is this. I'm walking through, and if I don't hold up my end of the agreement, the thing that happens to these animals, this death, that's what should happen to me if I break a covenant that I've made. So it's just like, hey, I don't know. I can't think of a promise that we make, that the average person makes, where we really mean it in that way. Hey, if I break my promise, I'm done. I'm cooked. I understand that the penalty is death for not holding my end of the deal. Now, you think about that for the Israelites. You go back to Exodus 24. It says, verse 4, he set 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. He sent the young men, verse 5, he sent the young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And so Moses took half the blood and put it in basins, and half the blood he threw against the altar. That is saying, all right, I am representing God here. I'm throwing half of it against the altar. That means this agreement that we're making, God has to keep his end of the deal upon pain of death. Now, when we know that when God makes an agreement with human beings, the question is not, will God hold up to his end of the deal or not? All right, he doesn't break his word. You may even say he's incapable of doing that. He just won't. And then the other half, the verse 7 says, then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient. And so Moses took the blood and threw it upon the people and said, behold the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with these words. Now you take the basic, just think about this in terms of covenant. They've heard the 10 Commandments. They've read these other, dozens of laws. And they said, we will obey. And if we do not obey, the consequence of not obeying is what? Death. Which I see that. There's times when someone tells you something and you wonder, did they mean that at the time, or did they not mean it at the time? I wonder, do the Israelites mean, hey, we're going to do everything you say, God? Their track record between Egypt and this point would say they're not really good at doing that. Maybe they meant it at the time. Maybe they just said what they're going to say. But it's an example of this, that sin brings death to people. It always has. And they agreed to it. And whether they meant it at the time or not, this was always going to be an area where they fell short. And so, say, well, what's a covenant if it's binding? What do you do? They seem to have locked themselves into, because they're not just making it for themselves, they're making it for their descendants. They've locked themselves into this lifelong binding upon pain of death contract for them and their descendants in perpetuity that's only going to result in bad things for them. How do they get out of it? So you can't cancel you cannot cancel a covenant, but you can replace it. So when Jamie and I have had kids, we said, you know what? If something was to happen to us, we need to find which family members we're going to pawn our young children off of, all right? Where are they going to go? That's something that we said we're going to take care of. And so we said, went to Kathy. We had a will made. She notarized it. All right. But there's some sort of contracting language. Since this was my first one, do you point this wipes out all previous wills? Do you do that on the first one? You do that on the first one, all right? And so when I had to make a tweak to my will at some point, and I remember there's some section on it like this sort of invalidates what was previously said. All right, something new replaced something that was old. And so with the problem of sin, we talk. This covenant is described as the old covenant, where yes, the Israelites say we are willing to pay the price for our own sin. It never works out, and so the only way that they would ever be free from it is when Jesus came and offered a new covenant. That was not about obeying external laws. And there's where you see the difference between the law of Moses and the law of Jesus. The law of Moses said, don't kill anyone. That's an external thing. You can hate someone. You can want to kill someone without actually killing them. And so the new covenant, the law of Jesus says, I'm not going to expect you to obey unconditionally. I'm going to forgive unconditionally. And that can transform you from the inside out so that you can serve God, you can obey him, not from like external pressure contorting you to live a certain way, but from being changed from the inside out. And so the people had made this covenant at the foot of the mountain on day 4. There's various additions, reapplications of it. It's reaffirmed several times, but the gist of it is they made this binding agreement. After that, what happens on day 4 is interesting. And so everyone's at the base of the mountain, Mount Sinai, where God is manifesting himself, and some people start to go back up. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up. In verse 10 is like, creates a little bit of a conundrum. It says, and they saw the God of Israel. It describes the scene. There was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. I'm obviously not an expert on precious stones and gems. If you said held out of sapphire, I would have no idea to tell you what it is. I did look it up. They can come in different colors, and one of the colors is clear. So it's the vision of God that they saw was God walking on, it says pavement, I would say a sheet of sapphire stone, clear, and if it didn't have any facets to it, like modern jewelry does, it would look crystal clear. Verse 11 says something that adds to the conundrum that we're going to speak of in a minute. And he did not lay a hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. They beheld God, and they ate and drank. Now, there are people that are simply oppose Christianity. I was talking to one of my extended. I better be careful how I say this. One of my extended family members basically has said, "I don't want anything to do with my family, even though they have a daughter an hour down the road in college and they're much further away because we're Christians. All right. If you watch the news and just observe things, I don't know how big of a segment of the population it is, but there is a segment of our population that does not like Christianity and what it stands for. And so what they're seeking to do is discredit Christianity. If it's not true, the belief is it's a superstition. It's unintelligent, superstitious people clinging to the Bible, and they just need to trust science instead. I don't know how big that segment is. It's different wherever you are. It'd be different in Franklin County versus Greene County, Ohio. It'd be different in Chicago versus Kentucky. One of the ways that they sue this is they seek to discredit the Bible by saying it contradicts itself. And so we need to be aware of this and be savvy about it. If I said to you, is God invisible? What would your answer be? Yes. Someone else said no. All right. So this is why it's tricky. And so there are some points in the Bible where it says that God is invisible. In 1 Timothy 6:16, it talks about God being the King, eternal, immortal, and invisible. And so this verse says that God's invisible. 1 Timothy 1:17, it talks about faith being seeing him who is unseen or invisible. The other part is it talks about in Romans 1:20, there is a reference to God's invisible attributes. So we can't see him. And so what we have to very carefully say is there's a sense in which God is invisible, but also there's times when he manifests himself. That is called, this is the fancy theological word of the day, theophany. When God manifests himself physically, a theophany, this article I read gave us this good definition. A theophany is an appearance of God. It's about the presence of God. It is an intense manifestation of the presence of God that is accompanied by an extraordinary visual display. And so it talks about there are different theophanies. There's different levels or intensities of a theophany. Think about it in terms of light. There is soft light. I turn the lamp on after dark in our living room. It's soft light. It's just enough to keep me from not falling asleep on the couch at 8:30 at night. All right, soft light. If you step out of a dark room in midday and it's sunny outside, that's kind of a medium light, kind of adjust my eyes light. But then you're probably experienced at some point. For me, it's when kids shine flashlights directly in my eye, like blinding light. Right. It's all light, different degrees. And we would say that theophanies have different degrees. And let's say the most intense is when God manifests his more of his glory than he usually does. And we have to sort of then think about what's in, how little is this language, but we'd say in God's most intense manifestations, can a person usually see that? Look at that directly. I mean, you're not supposed to look directly at the sun, right? And so the idea is that we know you cannot see God in his most, even though it's not him, it's a manifestation of him. You cannot look at directly at die. It seems that these elders were the exception to the rule. Now I'm content to say that exceptions prove the rule. And there's all sorts of examples. Moses asked to see God, and he says, you can look at my back. Someone said about this, hey, it's just you're looking. They bowed down before God and just saw his feet, because you're bowing down and you look at someone, you just see their feet. I said, oh, maybe that makes a little bit of sense. But I went back, and did you read any of that in the verses we just read? No. So it's, I think the conclusion that you kind of have to live with here is that on this day 4, when they were up there, they saw something that human beings usually don't see, the fullest expression of who God is. And even though they deserved to die, God spared them. We have, there is one verse that I want us to read, because what does any of this have to do with Christianity? You must see. So if you go to 1 John chapter 3, it says something pretty amazing. I didn't write down the verse, so well, let me start with this. Jesus is an expression of the divinity in human form. We have never physically seen him, but one of my favorite sections of the Bible is 1 John 3, 1 through 2, talks about the future, how we will see the Son of God. It says this, see what kind of love the Father has given us, that we should be called children of God, and so we are. The reason the world does not know us is because that it did not know him. Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. But when we know that when he, meaning Jesus, appears, we shall be like him. So we're going to transform from the inside out, not just our bodies, but our souls when Jesus returns. Why is that possible? Because of the last phrase, because we will see him as he is. We will be able to see, every Christian will be able to see Jesus in the fullness of his glory, in his divinity, something that has always been not allowed, a cause of death. And we'll see him as he is. It'll change us. The other verse that I thought I wrote down the reference for, didn't. I want to close with is this. It's in 1 John. I'll find it for you, probably in between Sunday school and church. It says, when Christians show each other the love of God, when we love each other sacrificially, those who are not within the church, they see God in that. So the best way for a person to see God, and obviously not physical, but seeing Christians show love and concern and care and sacrificing for each other, is a way in which people outside the church can see God. All right, we will stop there. I can see the top of Roger's head. Any prayer requests added? I forgot to mention it. So we will close in prayer right now. Dear Father, thank you for today. Thank you for all the ways you bless us and love us. And I just pray we will be always thankful that we are not bound to a set of laws that we can't keep, but that you've offered us grace. I thank you that that your Spirit lives within us, and that it's not a matter of how close we can get to you, but that you know us just in every way. And so I pray that we kindle that flame of your Spirit living within us, and that we are salt and light in our world. Help us to share with other people your greatness and your goodness as seen in your Son, Jesus. In his name I pray. Amen.